And welcome to our Adult Sunday School for Sunday, December the 10th. We have completed the age of the patriarchs, or aiming down the transition from the likes of Joseph and Job to the Exodus. So we're in Exodus chapter 1. And as we are turning to our spot in Exodus chapter 1, I have another verse to share, words of Christ from the Gospel of John, chapter 4, verse 24. John says to the woman at the well, God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth. Well, as you've all gotten to know me, and you've endured and graciously spent this time with me, looking at this truth, the truth of these things is actually a form of worship. It is proclaiming the truth of God and celebrating the truth of God as we see how these things played out. In Exodus, we're told about the population of the Lord's people growing, which we are told about in a few places. We're told in Genesis 47:27, Israel lived in the land of Egypt, in Goshen. They acquired property in it, were fruitful, became very numerous. Amen. As we look together now where we are, as we're moving along in Exodus 1, verse 7, but the sons of Israel were fruitful and increased greatly and multiplied and became exceedingly mighty, so that the land was filled with them. And we are taking the time to explore the truth of this as we make our way, counting down to the birth of Moses, which from the death of Joseph to the birth of Moses is about 65 years. So that's the time frame we're looking at here. This moment in time is also mentioned by Stephen in Acts 7. Just one verse here where we're told, verse 17 of Acts 7, but as the time of the promise which God had assured to Abraham was approaching, the people increased and multiplied in Egypt. So Stephen, with his Holy Spirit commentary on his message to the Jews accusing him, brings out God's plan and God's part behind the scenes in bringing this out, recognizing that the time of the promise to Abraham was coming near. And so God was fulfilling that. So before we dive into some other things, moving the countdown of time on for us, I have this right over here. Show screen here. Again, getting some background stuff from Egyptologist David Roll on some of these timelines, but we're going to differ from him on the Exodus, so we'll get to all that when the time comes. There's another gentleman named Dr. Glenn Fritz, who, former military guy, became a dentist, and then he started exploring Bible geography so much that that's not him, that he ended up getting a PhD in geography and all these things. Yeah. So it just kind of happened almost by accident. So looking to some of his writings, there's this place right, let me zoom in a little bit. Yeah. Right here. This place is called Wadi El Arish. It's mentioned in Genesis 15:18, which I'll read for us. And these things are going to tie into the upcoming Exodus that we're aiming towards. When God speaks to Abraham in Genesis 15, in verse 18, on that day, the Lord made a covenant with Abraham, saying, to your descendants, I have given this land, from the river of Egypt, as far as the great river, the river Euphrates, the land of the Canaanite, and all through those other ites that we talked about before. So there again is the promise to Abraham being referenced, and he talks about from the river of Egypt. Well, coming from the promised land into Egypt, there's only one river. It's this one right here. It's the Wadi El Arish. This is a stream that comes and goes. It's not constant. Sometimes it evaporates, sometimes it's back in place. It goes up into the, comes off from here. It goes into the Mediterranean there. It is about 25 miles to the west of the current border with Israel right here. So God told Abraham that this river was going to be part of the boundary of the land he is giving him. And then he goes on to describe some of the rest of it. So We all have heard of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Well, it wasn't just Bible, that was Old Testament Bible that was found in those caves. There's another writing, it's called the Genesis Apocryphon. This is written in Aramaic. Part of the Bible is written in Aramaic. This Aramaic document that was found there in these Qumran caves, it's from about 150 BC to 70 AD. Part of the scroll is actually a commentary, and it actually gives commentary on Genesis 15 and Abraham actually going out. God told him to walk the land. And so we actually have a commentary on Abraham walking the land. And so it talks about this. And so paraphrasing what it says there in the Aramaic, so Abraham starts over here. In that book, it's called the Gihon, which means the belly. And so this is the river of Egypt, the Wadi al-Arish. It's right here, kind of the underbelly of the land. That's God's promising to them. Remember, when they exit out of Egypt, they're going to be aiming towards the promised land. So what land are we talking about? And so Abraham starts here. He moves clockwise, first going north along the Mediterranean coast here, up towards the territory that would later be Dan. Then he turns east across the mountains, goes over here towards the Euphrates River. And the Euphrates River is said to reach down to, let me zoom out here, down to the sea. Right here, and in the language there, it says as the Red Sea. But that right there is the Persian Gulf. So back for those folks, it was all called the Red Sea, all of that. So there's the Euphrates River. So Abraham's walking along here. And then it says that Abraham turns south following along that. So he's coming back down south here, and he follows down parallel to the sea over there. He comes down south to right here. And this is where it gets interesting. Again, talking about the borders of the promised land. So he's coming back down south, and he gets to this point until the cleaving tongue of Yam Suf comes out. Now, in Hebrew, Yam Suf is what gets translated in our Bibles as the Red Sea. The Red Sea does not exist in Hebrew. There is no, the phrase Red Sea is not in the Hebrew Bible. It was just translated to be that. And it's not even a translation. They just assumed it was the Red Sea they were talking about. And so what we actually read here in Abraham's marking out of the promised land that God's giving to them, it's told that he came down south until the cleaving tongue of the Yam Suf. Yam means sea, Suf means boundary or ending. So the boundary sea. Boundary sea goes out from the Red Sea. So to hear this phrase, this is amazing, describing the relationship between what we know today here as the Gulf of Aqaba and the Red Sea. It clearly shows that the Yam Suf of the Bible is attached to, but separate from, the idea of the Red Sea. So there's something unique here, this cleaving tongue that comes out that Abraham knew in his day. So he comes back there. That's the boundary of the promised land. And then he makes his way back up to the river of Egypt, the Wadi al-Arish, and comes up there. So we're told basically through Genesis and this commentary on it, what the boundaries of the promised land are, and that they include right here, the Yam Suf, what the Bible later calls the Red Sea. That's not really the Red Sea. So it's going to come to right here, the boundary of the promised land. So everyone's excited, right?
Part of the Sinai Peninsula.
Exactly. So yeah. So this part right here, from here down to here, this part of the Sinai Peninsula, exactly right. So that's supposed to be part of Israel as the promised land here. So, but notice the detail that they took in commenting on this and how accurate they were with the actual geography as well. They knew what they were talking about. And Abraham, walked the land as God told him to, and got a sense of the land that his people would be inheriting. The land that coming out of the Exodus, they're supposed to be going to. So that will come up again as we get closer to the Exodus and the people going out. The other item to bring up is a mountain. And we're going to talk about the influence of these people, because we have to remember, to understand the truth of the Lord's people as they are growing in Egypt, the land they left and the land they're coming back to, these Canaanites and all these things that they're dealing with, and the false gods of all these Canaanites that they are to be making a distinction and a separation from. So up here in Phoenicia, Lebanon, and all that, as we go further up here on into even Syria, there's an old city called Ugarit. We talked a little bit about, we'll come back to it, but there's a mountain above it known as Jebel Akra, also known as Baal Zephon. Yeah, so Baal's in part of the mountain's name. So what's going on here? Well, our records of this area go back thousands of years, even to the early days of Neolithic, New Stone Age, as they're spreading out, Flood, Tower of Babel, all those things into the early Bronze Age. But the high point of this place here, in fact, let's take a look at this mountain. Not Ugarit, we want Baal Zephon. Yeah, so let's do this. So here's this mountain here that we're going to be talking about. That was very, very important for all this land and well known to the patriarchs. There it is. So check this place out. This mountain right on the ocean here, or Mediterranean Sea, I should say. Their high point actually came a little after the time we're talking about now, before the Exodus. Their high point came later on during the time of Judges, when the Middle Bronze Age is winding down. And we have it in the book of Samuel, reference to Dagon and others, of course, Baal as well. Well, over here in this area, Ugarit, the mountain, Dagon and Baal are the main gods that they worship. And they've got a major temple to Dagon and to Baal over in this area, over with Ugarit by this mountain. The Baal temple had a big stone thing, a stela of Baal with a thunderbolt. And they had, way up here in the north, they had an Egyptian one, the dedication to Baal Zephon. And they had a large tower, it's about 60 feet tall. That was a landmark for ships at the sea here. So this place was very, very important to the people of the area. Within the ruins, they found 17 stone anchors. Yeah, so the sailors were leaving their anchors, so sailors were honoring this place. So this place rises up from a narrow coastal plain. It gathers thunderstorms, so a lot of thunderstorm activity here, which is why Baal is a god of thunder, and one of the things of the storms and all that stuff. And so they found over here with this mountain a huge mound of ashes and debris. This mound was 180 feet wide, 26 feet deep. They were only able to excavate the first 6 feet of it because the site then got closed because it's in a Turkish military zone right there on the border with Syria. Yeah. So not a very comfy, cozy place to be and to be doing stuff. So the Canaanite gods of Baal and Dagon worshipped here in this area. Hey, guy. Hey, folks. Yeah, Here's the view from the water looking at this. So very prominent and very well known in the area here of northern Canaan into Syria. Ooh, spiffy. Yeah. And this was recognized as a place of the gods. So what's this have to do with our patriarchs and the folks in Egypt? Well, after the Canaanite Phoenicians, then the Greeks adopted this mountain and made it a mountain of Zeus and called it Mount Cassius. So similar to Mount Olympus over here. And its name Akra in Greek comes from the word meaning point. So this was a point of reference for the people. But as I mentioned, they found Egyptian stuff way up here in the north here. Again, this mountain, Syria, Turkey area here, north of Lebanon, that mountain is way up north. See here, and here's Egypt down here. Bring it up. There we go. So what's stuff from Egypt doing way up here in this mountain? They discovered Egyptian objects and hieroglyphs. So Egypt actually dominated this area. This power and influence of Egypt included the Mediterranean and the trade and all that was going on up here. When? During the 12th dynasty, during the time of Joseph and his pharaohs. And that is how the Canaanite god of Baal got into Egypt. Baal was worshipped in Egypt. I think Egypt had plenty of their own local gods. What do they need with a foreign one? Yeah, it's not like they were running low on gods. But yeah, in fact, Baal worship was practiced over here in the Northeast Delta, and a large percent of the population were Semite soldiers, sailors, merchants, and travelers. So they were interacting and engaging and bringing the gods with them. And so the false gods from here were polluting Egypt back here in that 12th dynasty. And Egypt had the cult of Seth, Lord Chaos. And so Seth became equated with Baal. And so they kind of just made them interchangeable. And so that's part of the worship there. So by the time that we're in now with Egypt's 13th dynasty, the Canaanite Baal-Zephon cult has already been well established, being practiced right here. And again, the Israelites are there in the land of Goshen while all this is going on. So not only do they have the Egyptian gods around them, but they've got from their homeland, they've got Baal and this Baal-Zephon reference, down here. So what's this have to do specifically with the Lord's people? Well, remember our patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, and Job. So this mountain home for Baal called Zephon, they knew about it. They were familiar with it in their time. Abraham was likely in contact with the people from here. Remember, he came from Haran, which is down here. Haran is about 180 miles northeast of Mount Zephon here, Baal-Zephon. So, and as he came down into the promised land, he came even closer to it as they went down here. So as he's traveling on foot past these areas and dealing with all these people, this famous mountain is a topic of conversation and the gods associated with it. So we have Abraham. We also have his grandson, Jacob, who went from the promised land right back by it on up to Haran to get a couple wives and some other things, and came on back down. So he was in close proximity to all that as well. In fact, this became a point of reference that Baal-Zephon is in the north. The word Zephon became the Hebrew word for north, as that became such a point of reference. And this reference point of Baal-Zephon is going to come up in the Exodus. So the things that they were dealing with their local neighbors in the time, winding down the patriarchs, affected them in the area of Egypt, and it's going to play a part in them in their Exodus and coming back into the land. So all these things are going to be related and connected as we come back to all that. So any questions on the river of Egypt over down there or the mountain of Baal-Zephon? Well, then, as we kicked off last week, our journey moving on from Job, we talked about how while the Lord's people were here in Egypt, while we are in the 13th dynasty, while we're exploring the growth of the people in Exodus 1, verse 7, while they are away from the promised land, other folks are coming in from the north and the west into it. In fact, they're coming from this area here. Let's go to here. Oh, we got some chat stuff. Yay, chats. Red Sea. Let's see. So the Red Sea, as noted throughout the Exodus and thereafter through the New Testament, but is no longer existent. Actually, it's there. The body of water doesn't change. It's what it's referred to as. So back in the day, the Greeks included the Persian Gulf as part of the Red Sea in their big, broad naming of everything. And so Hebrew is Yam Suf, red is not, Yam Suf means sea that is boundary or sea that is ending. Yam, sea, Suf means ending. There's no red in any of that. It's not a so Red Sea, it does not come from the Hebrew. When the Hebrew Bible was translated into Greek, that's when they thought, okay, what they're calling the Yam Suf, that's what we know as the Red Sea. So we're just going to slap the name Red Sea on it. It's not a translation of Hebrew Yam Suf. Yam Suf means sea of ending or sea of boundary, which makes sense because that was the boundary of the Lord's people that Abraham walked right there, the Gulf of Aqaba. So when we see Red Sea in the Bible, that's not what the Bible actually says. It actually says Yam Suf, which means sea of boundary. So good, important. Yeah, Erythia thalassa, from the Greek also. That's Red Sea in the Greek there. Red in God bless you. Red in Hebrew is Adam or Edom. Very similar names from the red clay, the red earth that Adam was formed from. And Edom, well, Esau was a ruddy, hairy guy, so he was also called that as well. Yeah. The modern day Red Sea, let's zoom out here. I'll minimize that and come back to it. So here we are. Let's actually start a new page and refresh that. Earth. Boom. So the modern Red Sea is south of that. The Gulf of Aqaba is one of two split-offs from the Red Sea. And the other one is the Gulf of Suez, where you've heard Suez Canal that goes up from the Gulf of Suez up to the Mediterranean. God bless you. So if we go back to here, we'll stop right here. Hello, fella. And so the Red Sea actually is down there. That's the Red Sea, that's the Gulf of Suez, and that's the Gulf of Aqaba. That was the boundary that Abraham was given there. So let's see, go back to the chat. And let's see. Is that the end of that? Okay. So that's the modern day. So there we have that. Okay. So back over here, go ahead and close that for now. So we talked about these folks in the north who came into the land while the Lord's people were in Egypt. So we showed how, zoom in a little bit here. They came from this. Let's see, I want to be on that one. Let's see. So they came from the north and moved in and built the big cities that Joshua and them would have to be dealing with when they got back. And how while the Israelites are growing, the Egyptians are starting to realize, hey, these guys are becoming quite an influence here. And it becomes a bit of a problem for the Egyptians. Here we are. Zoom that. So we talked about how we've got new folks ruling in here. That's hanging up a little bit, so we won't worry about that right now. So the main thing to take away from all of this is that times are shifting around the world while the Israelites are growing and prospering in the safety of Egypt and in the good land of Goshen. Things are shifting around them. We've got kings changing out in some areas. We've got Hammurabi's dad now in Babylon. We've got in Egypt, as we've seen, we've got the pharaohs being a little weaker in their influence, and the viziers, the number 2 guy, being more influential. In fact, Joseph being the main one, and then his sons after him. In fact, being influential in determining the next pharaohs, but still having a lot of power themselves. And we wrapped up last week seeing how, looking at the Egyptian names for the people we know in the Bible, that it was Joseph's son Manasseh, who became vizier after him. And then he actually became Pharaoh at 90 years old for about 4 months before he died. and they became Pharaoh Renseneb, and then he died, then his brother Ephraim was a vizier for him. So we're counting down. We are now about the year 1579 BC. We've got another guy ruling in Egypt whose name is Hor. And we actually have discovered his tomb. And what's really cool about this, see about getting this fixed. I'm actually taking it in this afternoon to Best Buy. They're going to do a cleanup for us. This guy Hor, we actually have a wooden statue of him that remains from this time frame, which is pretty wild that the wood would be preserved and last this long. So it's actually a life-size item that we have of his. So we have, 1576 BC, we're now only 50 years before the birth of Moses. We get another pharaoh named Sedjef something kare, kind of obscured in the writing. Births are happening as the people are being born in the line of Levi. There are 3 different lines of his sons. And these different lines of Levi have different roles that they play in the Lord's people as they go out from the Exodus and are established, these Levites. There's a line of Gershon, Kohath, and Merari. Moses and Aaron come from the line of Kohath. So in Gershon, their line, we've got more births happening. In that line, we've got Jahath, who about 48 years old becomes the father of Shimei, and those generations keep coming down. We've talked about the different nations in the Persian Gulf, Larsa and Isin, all that. Well, say goodbye to Larsa because they're being in constant battle with Babylon, and it's not going to go well for them. So as I mentioned, they're under their last king. Yeah. We've got 1572 BC, Levi, his son Kohath has Aram, who is Moses' dad, who's already born, as well as Jochebed, who is going to be Amram's wife, is actually Levi's daughter. So we've got Levi, Kohath, and then Amram. Well, Kohath's sister is Jochebed, and Amram will marry his aunt, and they will become the parents of Moses and Aaron and Miriam. Well, Amram has a brother born right now to Kohath named Izhar, and these folks are having people later in life. In fact, he's mentioned 1 Chronicles 6:38. Samuel Kings Chronicles 6:38. Here we are. 1 Chronicles 6:38. Son of Izhar, son of Kohath, son of Levi, the son of Israel. So their line keeps going. They're having them later in life, possibly even in their 90s. New Pharaoh Sobekhotep, 1572. New guy in Byblos, Yantin-Ammu, 1570. And the Isin dynasty gets wiped out by Babylon in 1570s and thereabout. 1568, new Pharaoh Kjendjer, he builds a pyramid. We haven't seen much about pyramids with these later guys. Well, you're not going to go find his pyramid either. There's pretty much nothing there anymore. And so it was over, his capital was probably Memphis. He had his pyramid over in the burial area of Saqqara, but not much left. It pretty much got taken and used for other things. So it didn't get very far. This actually brings us to, we'll wind down here, 1568 in the line of Joseph through Ephraim to Joshua. Laadan is born to Tahan, about 20 years old when he fathers him. So that line's progressing. We actually have a major event in 1568 BC. It's recorded in Exodus chapter 6. Here in Exodus chapter 6, verse 16. Exodus 6:16. These are the names of the sons of Levi, according to their generations. Gershon, Kohath, and Merari. The length of Levi's life was 137 years old. Levi dies at 137, about the year 1568. Looks to be the last of Joseph's brothers to be alive. So that would put Judah's son Perez about 106 years old, his son Hezron about 93, and his son Ram about 35 in that line of Christ. So this is part of that shift now, where we have now the dying off of that generation of Joseph. Now we're going to have things continue to change in Egypt, where there's going to be a separation from the influence of Joseph and his family, and a rise of some national desire from the local Egyptians, and to have less of an influence from these foreigners, these Semites that are in there. So we will wind down with that here. Let me see. So the death of Levi is actually a very good place to pick up for next week. But before I pause there, does anyone have any questions? I know it's kind of a weird transition here, as things are kind of unstable. We're going through some names and changes, and it is a unstable time. It is a time where, while the Lord's people are strong and secure and growing, the world around them is less stable and is shifting and unsettled. And it kind of takes me back to the devotional with Daniel, how Daniel, into his old age, was stable and consistent, while Babylon was thinking, hey, here they are being great and celebrating their conquering and their treasures. And all of a sudden, here's the hand of God writing on the wall, and they're freaked out. Who do they go to? The stable servant of God. So while the world around us might seem to be rejoicing in their power and influence, it's not very lasting. And it'll shift and it'll change. We see just throughout the course of the Bible, we've gone from Egypt being the greatest nation to, okay, now it's Assyria. Okay, now it's Babylon. Okay, now it's Persia. Okay, now it's Greece. Okay, now it's Rome. And then on from there, where the Lord's faithful people have always been here and throughout it all. And even despite the attempts to get rid of them, hasn't worked. Attempts to get rid of God's word hasn't worked. What God does is permanent and lasting in the world of shifting and instability around us. So always good to be found with him. And we will pick up next week from the death of Levi and the changes bringing us to the time of the birth of Moses and the world he's born into. But any other questions or reactions or thoughts on what we've looked at this morning? Yeah, Sister Diana. Oh, then I like it. Yeah.
So is it compare? How would you compare to the Great Lakes?
I'm so glad you asked that. What I will actually do for next week, I've got a picture that shows, unfortunately not the Great Lakes, but I can do a size comparison. It actually shows a map of the state of Texas plopped onto the Sinai Peninsula and how that looks size-wise. Yeah, so I can bring that in next week. Yeah. And so we look at these things and we think how big they are. And for example, the continent of Africa, on which is Egypt, it's a big continent. But when you look at these, when you zoom into like Egypt and the Promised Land and all that, it's actually very small compared to the states that we're used to. So I'll bring in that comparison next week for us to look at. So not a silly question. Oh, yeah. Alan.
In reference, where is Moses out and
that is actually the Gulf of Aqaba. Let's see it. No worries. Yeah, see, that's the trail that they took, the path that we're going to follow. Yeah, we're a little locked up right now. See if that one's any better.
Yeah, that'd be good.
Yeah, they came across the Sinai Peninsula and down to the Gulf of Aqaba. And they crossed actually at the halfway point, which is interesting because the Psalms, sometimes you have to go to other books of the Bible to get more information than what's told in that specific book. There's more information about the Exodus than just what's in the book of Exodus. Psalms talk about the Exodus and give us more information. There's a psalm that says the Red Sea is cut in half, divided in half in the Hebrew. So at the place where they crossed the Nueva beach, that's actually the halfway point in the Gulf of Aqaba, where you've got, this much in the north and that much in the south. They crossed right in the middle. And so that kind of confirms where all this happened. And this brings us over to where Mount Sinai is.
So they kind of wanted that.
Yep. And so when they're desert wandering after Mount Sinai, that's up here. Here's the Promised Land. Mount Sinai is further south. So they're wandering up in this area, waiting for a generation to die off before they then go up into here. And with Joshua, cross the Jordan River and go on to Jericho and the others.
Thank you.
Yeah. It helps me keep it straight for sure. Absolutely. Anything else from anyone else? If not, we'll wrap it up for this morning. Go ahead and stop our share and stop our